Hello, today is Tuesday, October 23rd, 2018. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle call, and there are a bunch of agenda items. I do not see Saad on, so we'll have to jump back to him.
I'm here.
Oh, you are? Oh, there. Did you want to talk about the issue you had logged?
Sure. So the guidance we've gotten from SIG architecture over the past couple of quarters is to transition from adding new items or new API objects as built-in objects and transition to using CRDs for even objects that core Kubernetes components will use. So CRDs have been great for if you have a purely external project, but when you have internal core Kubernetes components depending on CRDs, you run into a bunch of challenges. So we were one of the teams that actually introduced a couple of CRD objects that the attach-detach controller, for example, will use last quarter. One of those challenges was how does a CRD get installed, a CRD that a core component depends on. Our initial attempt at this was, well, the controller that uses it as part of initialization could install it. There was a bunch of feedback saying that was not a good idea, so we removed that code. There's another team, security team that was doing CRDs as well. They ended up using add-on manager to deploy their CRDs. For this quarter, to unblock ourselves, we're going to follow that path. But it sounds like there is a larger requirement for the project to kind of figure out how these CRDs should be installed, whether it should be some sort of new controller, some new mechanism, maybe a V2 of the add-on manager. So I wanted to get that discussion started here. I went to API Machinery last week, and their recommendation was to come talk to SIG Cluster Lifecycle.
So I see Justin turned on his camera, so I know we both probably are going to echo similar things. There's ongoing work with regards to management of core add-ons and the talk of bundles, right? And that work is ongoing. I don't think it's in a fully fleshed out state yet, but I'll pause there and let Justin talk.
Yeah, I think what you said, Tim, was spot on. I guess my question would be, if there is a controller, whatever that some more privileged thing has to install, is there any reason that privileged thing, whatever it ends up being, should not also install the CRD? Like, is that not what we want, as it were?
So I think one reason would be if you had two controllers that also wanted to install the same CRD. I mean, you could work around that, but.
Sorry, did you say multiple controllers? I missed the keyword, I think.
Yeah, if you have, so in the past, what problems we would have is I would want to install multiple aggregated API servers, and each one wanted to install a global non-namespaced AA registration or API registration resource. That would be the only comment. Otherwise, I think you're right. It's the right place to install it.
So it becomes a little weird to me in that if you start to modify core APIs, it is basically a core component then. It's no longer an add-on, and it's moved to core component. So I can see a migration path for some things that are add-ons to be managed via add-on manager. But once we get into the state of if the API is quote unquote V1 of some sorts, right, and it's dependent upon by multiple core components, it is a core component by itself, right?
I mean, I think one of the reasons for the bundle is sort of this observation that like a Kubernetes cluster shortly won't work on a cloud provider in the same way that it does today, because you'll need an external cloud controller. And is that core or not? That's sort of semantics, but I think we want to acknowledge that there will be a bunch of things that now have to be installed for even parity with what we have today.
I think bundles is the right way to solve this in the current state of where things are, because you're still going to have the core API. I don't see that really migrating away in wholesale. That would be a dangerous thing anyways from a deployment perspective. So it'd be like, these are new, are these all net new features, Saad?
Yes, they're basically features for CSI.
So if they're totally net new, then it makes perfect sense to have a separate bundle that applies the add-ons in bulk, which would include all the add-ons, not just this particular one. Now, is there going to be like, I don't exactly know how the installation process goes. Is it a separate controller, or do you want to have something actually creating? Because typically when you have a controller that can sometimes initially create these CRDs.
So for us, the behavior is, for example, the attach detach controller will look at a list of a particular CRD. If it exists, modify its behavior based on that. So the assumption that the attach detach controller would like is that this CRD already exists. We can add in logic that says if it doesn't exist, skip this logic. And we're going to need to handle the case where it exists, but somebody goes and deletes it. But that initial installation step is what we need to figure out. Like, how do we ensure that it exists beforehand?
Yeah, I think this is broadly applicable though too. I think we need to start to think about, it's not just a bundle of add-ons, it's like installation procedure for CRDs, which is like a one-shot type of installation. And that needs to be thought out more thoroughly because it doesn't just apply to you, it's going to apply to everybody.
Yes.
Do you have any current proposals in place that kind of overlaps with other folks that are kind of working on the bundling work? You're all Googlers, so I don't know if y'all talk to each other or what's going on.
I've got nothing beyond the add-on manager. I started on a controller to install it, but nothing that I'm aware of.
I mean, to unblock you, today you have to put your manifest for your controller somewhere, right? Can you just add the CRD registration into that same manifest? And I don't think that's actually going to change, whether it's in a bundle or not. Sorry.
We'll have multiple drivers, right, for CSI, and every driver will have its own set of manifests. All of them are going to need to install the same CRD. Having each of them try to install it seems like the wrong way. It's ideally a component that is installed by the system controllers, I guess.
I think, yes, I think we can get there. I think, I don't think it's the end of the world if they all install it the same, if they all include it, particularly if, like you can use customize to effectively do an include of another manifest. I'm sure other tools have similar notions.
So why wouldn't the controller manager on default initialization actually, if not present, create the CRD?
We had something like that, and we were asked to pull that out. I don't know if the folks who asked us to pull that out are on the call. They can probably represent why better than I can.
Do you have any idea who, because no one actually owns the controller manager code. That's actually an unowned bulk of code.
Yeah, I think Lava Lamp and some of the API machinery folks really didn't like the controllers pre-installing the CRD. I think part of the objection was the fact that the CRD code was being auto-generated within code instead of a manifest file, which is easier to keep track of. That also, I think, broke the API reviewer semantic that we're used to. So API reviewers are owners of the types.go API and the API folder. So it's very clear when API changes are being made and who the approvers are. If you have random controllers that are generating this code and installing the CRD, that semantic breaks down. And I forget what other objections they had.
I do agree that it is convenient that the controller registers its own one. I do think in production, like just for authorization type reasons, we want just to limit the permissions that this controller has. We would prefer not to have it actually registering its own CRD. But as I understand it, that's as simple as pre-register the CRD, the controller wakes up, says, oh, there's my CRD, I don't need to do anything. And then in development, it just works, as it were.
I do think that this is more broadly applicable, and we should start to think about the semantics of how we want to enable this installation. Is there a KEP in place that exists currently?
No, not at the moment. Part of this exercise is tried to find an owner for this. SIG Storage, I don't think is the right group because we're one of the consumers potentially. Ideally, I was hoping API Machinery would pick it up, but they suggested that Cluster Lifecycle might be a better owner.
Robbie, are you on the call too?
Yes. Sorry, I was running a bit late today.
Do you have thoughts here?
I was trying to read through the issue since I missed the beginning of Sa's description to figure out exactly what they're looking for. Because when I joined, he was saying something about the add-on manager, but I didn't catch the background.
Right. So real quick, all the SIG architecture has recommended that we stop adding new API objects as built-in objects. And even for core components, any new objects should be CRDs. This introduces a new set of challenges of if you have core objects depending on CRDs, what mechanism installs those CRDs. So for the short term to unblock ourselves, we're going to use the add-on manager. And it may be that that's sufficient for the longer term, but there are a set of challenges when you're using CRDs, and it may be worth thinking through if there's a better, more robust mechanism for installing CRDs. Because, for example, we want CRDs to be managed similar to the way that the current core API is managed, with a manifest file that has API approvers in a separate folder instead of kind of haphazard, every controller doing its own kind of thing.
Okay.
At least that's one of the minimum requirements.
So it sounds to me this is in some ways similar to storage class, right? Where the core controller for storage today, if there's like no storage class defined, it sort of gracefully degrades. But if the installation mechanism for the cluster has created a default storage class, then the built-in storage controller has sort of enhanced functionality.
Exactly.
It sounds sort of similar to that, where the core controller would rely on this CRD, but wouldn't start breaking or crash looping the controller manager if it's not there.
Yep.
But we would like the common installation mechanisms to have an easy way to plug in the creation of these CRDs on cluster creation.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the difference is where I draw the line between this and sort of add-ons is that add-ons are something that are sort of more actively managed as part of the upgrade of a cluster, whereas it sounds like, and maybe these are too, right? These CRDs, like you'd install when you create the cluster, and then potentially when you upgrade a cluster, you'd need to rev like the version of these CRDs, maybe run something that like does some translation or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I see them as being just like the core built-in API. When you upgrade, when you downgrade, we're going to need some sort of hooks to be able to say, okay, I'm upgrading this object. I need to run through some special downgrade or upgrade script or process, things like that. So I think, yes, in that way, they're different from add-ons.
Well, that sounds kind of similar to the way we've been talking about add-ons, because what we talk about add-ons is that add-ons are tied to the life cycle of the cluster, in the sense that, like, oftentimes when you upgrade your cluster, you also want to change the version of an add-on that's running, because we've tested a different version of add-on with a new version of the cluster, right? Like kubeproxy is a great example. When you upgrade your kubelets, you probably want to have the same version of kubeproxy and kubelet running on all the nodes, because that's the configuration we test. And, it might work in a different configuration, but it's not really supported in the same way. And so this would be the same thing where when you upgrade your, and I guess I'm curious about which component you think this is tied to. Is it tied to it's tied to the upgrade of the controller manager here effectively, right? Not the
yes, for the component that we're thinking about, yes. For other consumers, it might be, I don't know, kubelet or something else.
Yeah. Yeah, so I see a lot of similarities with add-ons. Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in and say anything about that. Does that sound right to you?
I definitely agree with that. It's very similar to add-ons, and I think it's pretty clear that SIG cluster lifecycle seems like the API machinery redirect to SIG cluster lifecycle feels correct, right? That feels like this is tied to the bundle work, tied to revving the add-on manager and making it meet whatever requirements it doesn't meet today. I can't think of a better SIG for it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I would like
Go
to
ahead.
see a proposal, though, written down in kept form that actually outlined how we plan to deal with this, because it could be potential chaos unless we have a uniform way of managing these things.
Yeah, it sounded to me like that's sort of what Saad was looking for, was like
Yeah.
find the right home for it so that we can start figuring out how to solve the problem once instead of creating chaos by everybody solving it separately. So I think that part of the process is working here. And it sounds like Saad is not proposing like I have the solution, but I have a short-term workaround that will unblock my short-term work in some cases. But if we're using the add-on manager to do this, on GKE, that's not going to help for a kubeadmin installation, right? So we are still going to want to have a more uniform way of doing this across installations and across different types of CRDs.
And I think that's where Tim mentioned the bundle as being a path forward, which I agree with.
Right. So,
Could you explain the bundle? I'm not familiar with it.
The bundle is Josh Hoke's work to create a format that is effectively a Kubernetes manifest that includes everything. It also includes some node configuration information. But the other thing it adds is that it adds the notion of components. So the ability to sort of say that certain manifests or certain objects relate to certain components of the system.
Got it.
So it's a sort of slightly more structured Kubernetes manifest, which is why I feel that if you put it into a Kubernetes manifest today with the add-on manager, there will be a fairly clear path to moving that into a bundle with where the file maps to a component type thing.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like the recommendation is short-term add-on manager seems like the right approach, and then longer term, hopefully we'll see a proposal out of this group for a more robust mechanism.
I do think that it does need to percolate into kubeadm too as well, because the add-on manager is only used by Google and GKE.
Yes, and that's why I was saying the add-on manager is a short-term solution for GKE, but like things like COPS and kubeadm and all the other installers aren't going to get it for free if we stick it in add-on manager.
Got it.
And specifically, that's why the components notion is so useful in the bundles, because then kubeadm might say, well, and COPS might say, well, I don't care about all the things in this bundle. I only care about the CRD that relates to storage. So I'm going to pluck that one thing out of the bundle, right? So that's a sort of easily adopt the bundle in COPS and easily adopt in kubeadm. And then gradually we can harmonize more and more type thing.
Yeah, and then there's a single place instead of percolating the information in 12 different places.
And we don't have to, we all test it and we all like build confidence together type thing.
So I guess two things. One, I agree with Tim, we should have a KEP describing this. And I think this SIG may end up having to own that KEP if it becomes sort of the general purpose. How do we do with CRDs? But Todd, it would be great if you could kick off the process, since it sounds like you've thought about this quite a bit, at least for your use case. And then two, we should make sure that these sort of requirements, hopefully written down in that KEP, feed into the process of revamping add-on management. So I think so far we've been thinking about add-on management more as controllers, I would say, that need to run, that are tied to the lifecycle of the cluster, as opposed to API objects, because sort of the key API objects, as you said, have been built in and have been revved with the API machinery as opposed to separately. But I think that's a really good way to think about it, because we are going to want it to have more and more sort of these extension APIs, other CRDs. They're like extra APIs we add on to clusters, and having a consistent way to deal with those across the lifetime of the cluster is going to be really nice.
I've actually just realized it's really subtle, because if the new version of your CRD introduces a new version, on a downgrade, you actually don't want to downgrade to the old CRD, right? You want to keep it you want to keep the CRD registered with the newly introduced API version, even if most people will then be using a lower. You don't want to orphan those newer versions.
Well, that's a general problem with our APIs, right? That it's not clear exactly how to downgrade. And that I think you're right to start with. That's probably a good line to draw, where to say we shouldn't just downgrade these because we might orphan things and break things, but we also need to figure out a way where it is possible to safely downgrade this as well.
That's a Googleism. We do backup and wholesale restore. So
sure. I mean, we do have upgrade downgrade testing, right?
Google has an upgrade downgrade testing.
Okay, so let's make sure there's owners assigned and timelines. So the feature issue that I've opened We need to figure out whether we want it to be part of 113 or not. It sounds like this is a short quarter. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of progress here. So would folks be okay removing it from the 113 milestone?
I would recommend it, honestly. I think given the fact of all the other things that are ongoing currently within the SIG, we are almost at feature freezes today. So yes, next quarter, please.
Okay. Sounds good. So I'll go ahead and remove it from the 113 lifecycle. We're going to proceed in SIG storage with using the add-on manager as a short-term workaround. And then for the 114 timeframe, we're willing to work with you guys to figure out what the requirements are for this and figure out what a long-term solution is.
Is it a alpha grade feature?
Currently, it is in alpha. Moving to beta is going to be blocked on using or implementing add-on manager. And then moving to GA is going to be blocked on having a proper CRD installation mechanism.
Okay, that's reasonable. Thank you. Is there any more ideas here or things that folks want to discuss? All right, next up, Marco.
Thank you, everyone.
Marco, upstream and move cluster API provider for DO into Kubernetes SIGs.
Yes. We can talk about this topic on some weeks ago. And as the status of the project, we have most of the stuff done first release. And established your file, which was described by SIG. And today we want to ask, is it possible to upstream it and to see how we can get forward on that. I talked to team, and as far as I got, we need to have a vote on that if the owners file is okay. So far, the owners are from organization. We have three of us from UTC, Alvaro, Keith, and me, and we have other side from the ocean. So this is it for now. I think the owners file followed some recommendation that other cluster API providers do, so it should look okay. And yeah, I would like to know how to get forward on that, and is it okay so far?
So we could either do a vote here or via mailing list. So lazy consensus applies to votes. So you could do a timeout of 3 days or something like that. I think maybe here on the call we could say, are there any objections to this? Silence means no. So I think just write an email with a timeout for 3 days. And when you file the request for a repository, point them at the voting email and say that voting has occurred. And with all the other details that are default for when you request in your repo, and you should be good to go.
Okay, so one more question about that. If the vote passes, do we want to start from the repo we have right now, or do we want to use the cluster API provider skeleton and re-implement and port everything we have right now?
That's
approach here.
That's your call.
Yeah, I was going to ask Tim, do you know if there's any legal CLA issues just blindly taking the repo into CNCF?
Not if it's Apache 2 license. And that should be a requirement for the licenses because Apache 2 is copy at will, right? So you should not have a problem.
Yeah, I just verified it is Apache 2. So I think, Marco, it's basically up to you since you and the other sort of container owners. Whatever you'd like to do that's easiest for you, you should go for it.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
One thing that I think is important to take a look at, though, if you decide to import or vendor things in, take a quick look at your dependencies to verify that your dep graph is Apache 2 as well. Now, as a project, we have not done this very consistently. We don't have tools for this, but just doing a quick pass and some type of note as part of your repo request would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. We were looking at the pre-CRD version of the cluster API recently and found that I think that some sort of LGPL dependency had snuck in there from the old API server builder dependency chain, which was unexpected. So yes, we need to be more careful. I think it was LGPL. Maybe it was some other license that we didn't like. But.
I pasted the rules in the chat. Yes, so the dependencies is one. There's some boilerplate things, and then the contributors must have signed the CNCF individual CLA or corporate CLA, ideally, and then if not, then there's some like escape hatch type thing. But hopefully there are few enough contributors that that is not an issue. I guess hopefully.
Any other last questions, Marco? It's super hard to hear you, in case you're wondering. I've been channeling my inner 15-year-old drive-through experience, but I think that means you're okay. All right, I'm going to mute you now, Marco. If you can use chat, that'd be helpful. Robert, next item.
Yeah, so I snuck this one in. I think we mentioned this a while back, but our SIG has 3 presentations that we're doing for KubeCon Seattle. Tim and I are going to give a SIG intro session, which is mainly targeted at trying to attract new folks to help join the SIG, and sort of talks about what our SIG does and the projects that are inside the SIG. The other 2 presentations, there's a deep dive on KubeADM. Tim, I don't know if you have a co-presenter for that yet or not. And there's a deep dive on the cluster API. I don't have a co-presenter yet. I have a couple people that have said that they're interested, but I'm trying to make the process sort of fair and equitable. So if people are interested and are current contributors to the cluster API project, please ping me on Slack. And by the end of this week, and then I'll reach out to the folks that have done so, and we'll try to figure out a somewhat fair way of picking a co-presenter. So I think it would be nice to have 2 presenters for each of the sessions, especially with some company diversity in there.
Hey, by the way, there's actually a 4th. There's VMware and Heptio are doing a one on using cluster API on on-prem and in the cloud. It's more of a usage.
Yeah, no, I know there are other SIG cluster lifecycle focused talks at the conference. There's also KubeSpray talk, and there's some other ones. I meant like ones that our SIG had signed up for as a SIG. Right? So these are ones that have to go through the same sort of approval process, right? Because we sort of short circuit that and say these are SIG sponsored talks. And as such, I think we are trying to open it up to presenters to get people involved who are interested in presenting that didn't go through the sort of the normal talk process. So just an FYI, I think we got pinged by the conference organizers and told that the clock was running out on adding co-presenters. So I just want to set a deadline for doing that so we can get those in place.
Yep. I think for the reach out to Robbie and myself, and we'll try to be fair and equitable. Next topic. This applies broadly to any separate provider right now. And the idea is, the problem that we currently are facing is that we want to be able to push per build container images per SHA, but across all of these federated repositories to a single GCS bucket for testing. And Liz was coming up with, Liz had a couple of issues, and I know I requested Ben to be on the call today to start to talk through them what the logistical problems are. But the basic gist is for development and for testing, for CI automation, not necessarily for releasing, that's a separate problem, that we would like to have, every single SHA or merge against the whatever branches are there be pushed to basically a development and testing bucket that we can use for just regular standard CI. Liz, do you have more details?
Yeah, so I can't really speak to anybody but the cluster API works. But just like getting Prow set up is sort of a non-trivial endeavor. I've mostly got it to the point where it's working, but it took a while. And given that we have so many of these cluster API providers, it would be really nice if we had some like sort of standard way that the repositories were laid out, that we could build tooling around them. Obviously, the requirements for actually testing them are going to be different depending on who the back end is. But the basic issue that I'm having right now is that most of the documentation on how you use Prow is just ask somebody in SIG testing and hope that the right person sees it. So.
Is there like a particular ask there? I mean, I know improving documentation is kind of an ongoing thing that definitely needs to happen, but that doesn't seem specific to Cluster API.
I think my specific ask right now is, one, how can we set up some infrastructure such that we can run these cluster API integration tests? There's some like common things that everybody's going to need, and it's not super clear to me how those are going to fit into the existing Prow-based infrastructure. Is that still too vague?
A bit. I mean, so like we have fairly standard stuff for like if someone wants to run a test and it's containerized. We also have stuff for like if you just want to use the merge robot and have it mostly integrated, you can always use something else that posts the status to GitHub. I think the main caveat there being that the Prow stuff makes sure we always test PRs against master before merging, and that's serialized, but otherwise that just works. I don't think we can say a lot more without knowing like what do the integration tests actually need, what do they do?
Well, I think right now the simple, if I summarize the simple problem, is we need to be able to build, push, and then test, right? Mm-hmm. The push is so for the eventual testing capabilities, right? And because it's in a separate repository, I don't care. I just basically want to be able to have a job that allows me to arbitrarily build, then push, then test.
So, I mean, that should be super doable today. I don't think we need any particularly different infrastructure for that. This is rough docs on like setting up something like that. Basically, you just write a Kubernetes pod spec that has a container and you add a few things around it to say this is the name of the job and this is what it needs to check out. Other than that, I mean, it's going to dump you into a container with a Go path set up with your code checked out, and you can run commands to do build and push and whatever.
So
what about sorry, go ahead, Tim.
So we can push any container to a standard location that's used for testing?
I think you might need to look into where to push. So I know, like, for example, with the build, mostly we're running like the Kubernetes like release infrastructure scripts that do pushing of the images. And I don't think anybody else has a better setup currently. I think KubeMark actually does something, has a bit of tech debt where it just like pushes to the GCP project that it's going to test in.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem we have is where do I put these containers that we created? And do we have ACLs to push those when we create a new job for Prow? And this is going to apply to every single cluster API
Yeah,
provider.
I don't think we have a repository for that. I think there was a thread with the infra work group on that, and I'm not sure where that went. That group is sort of still spinning up.
Okay. Hi. Can we use a local Docker registry running in a container? I pasted a gist that I used for trying some stuff out. So it's easy to.
I don't think if we're actually eventually this is the first pass of testing, but eventually we're going to do periodic jobs with full deployments, just like we do with other jobs. And that will require an actual registry that is accessible to the outside world, so they can pull the images, into some Amazon deployment, so that they can actually run it. Same with other cloud providers, right? So if DO wanted to have its own integration, then they need to be able to pull from some publicly facing development registry to get that data.
So if we can get a bucket, I mean, there's nothing preventing pushing to that from Prow, but Prow doesn't itself provide like a GCR or like Docker Hub or something like that. And I think that sort of thing has been on a per project basis right now.
Yeah, because there's many projects all underneath the same rubric or state space right now.
Yeah.
Right. So not all tests do exactly the same thing, right? I know we need it, at some point, but can we unblock ourselves by starting to use a local Docker registry, get some stuff going, and then by the time, I'll try to figure that out in the Kate's infra team. If we can have something similar to the Kate's test images, where periodics can be loaded from.
This will get us past the first pass level of testing, yes.
Right, and even in the periodic jobs, we can download the image, the container image tars, and then upload to the Docker registry, and then use the Docker registry. So there'll be other things that we could do when we get to that point. I'm hoping that we won't need to do that at that point, but let's get going.
I'm totally fine with that first pass step, so long as, like, in the ideal world moving forwards, though, we do want to have, not in the ideal world, I think we do want to have the ability for developers to, get those images easily accessible for their own development testing on a PR basis.
Yeah, we have that pattern right now in CI cross jobs. CI cross jobs push, images to a GCR repository, and then other people pick it up from there. So yeah, we have that pattern, and we need to replicate that pattern already when we are moving from Google to CNCF. Plus, the additional thing here is we need to open up that process to all the cluster providers and cloud providers as well. So yeah, there is more work to be done, not just for this group.
So I posted in chat, there was a thread on this recently. I don't think it resulted in an actual registry yet, but there is like a broader discussion for this.
Right. So my task, one of the tasks this week is to create a bunch of issues that we can all work on. But yeah, we have been getting these kinds of requests from different teams. Even the OpenStack cloud provider needs a place where we can push stuff to. So, and all the cluster providers.
The other thing that basically everybody is going to need in common is some way, once we get to the point where we want to run actual integration tests against actual infrastructure, all of us are going to need some way to store secrets. The API, the AWS folks were talking to AWS, the DigitalOcean people for talk, etc.
Yeah, so far that is a Kubernetes secret in the build and test cluster, with the implication that like that probably can be stolen by a pull request, but no matter where we put it, if you give some, cluster API implementation access to some credentials, someone could, put code in their PR to obtain that cred. And so it just needs to be one that's for CI resources and doesn't have access to anything else.
Okay, that makes sense.
Totally
That's
not
also a reason.
terrifying.
So that's also a reason that we require OK to test for people that are not part of the SIG membership, because basically we're saying we trust people that are part of the SIG organization, and if not, then we expect someone in the organization to actually take a glance at the code before applying that label, so that we don't have that sort of problem from somebody just randomly submitting a PR.
Which has worked surprisingly well so far. Do have some concerns about it, but that's a different discussion.
So action items going forwards. We're going to need to probably work with Dims and Ben on getting a job set up, but it's kind of going to be a little bit of a weird job for the time being, to be able to push containers to this local registry part, which is part of the job itself in order for it to run. And the job actually will contain multiple steps.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can't get this local registry to talk to Kind.
Yeah, and so there's also like even just like throwing up a temporary registry somewhere, like maybe it isn't long-term official, but I don't know, like one of the free ones like Quay or Docker Hub or something might work, and then just add credentials to that to the job.
That was my original kind of question, is if we had a standard location for all of us doing development images to just push to that location. They're just development images, so I don't even care. So as long as we'd have that capability, I don't care about the registry.
Right,
yeah,
you're right.
I don't think we have one right now. That's like each project does something, and most of them are not doing a develop images one. They're only doing like prod, quote unquote.
So the OpenStack cloud provider uses a Docker Hub account, which is shared between the team, and we push both periodic builds as well as the tag builds there for people to use. But
I would recommend that at least with Prow, you should probably, there should be like a separate devel registry, because those are going to be less trusted images.
No, we are not using Pro. We are pushing it from OpenLab. So we don't want to pollute any of the work that's being done here internally.
Yeah, it gets a little weird. We could always build our own infra, but I think ideally we'd want to use common infra, because this is a problem that exists across the community.
Yeah.
And as we push things off of Google into the CNCF, this is a common pattern that's going to occur.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to do it. We just have to figure out how to get there.
Seems like we might end up being something of a pilot project.
Yeah. Like I said, I think a few people have looked at this, and there's very little of actual automated image pushing besides Kubernetes today. We recently have some, but for test infra, but that works a bit weird. It's only in post-submit, I think, not in pre-submit. And so it's running in a separate, more trusted cluster that only has certain builds in it. And it's pushing to like the prod test images location.
Are there any more topics regarding this?
So which SIG should own this action item to try to resolve this?
A registry or the job?
Yeah, for the registry, for the infrastructure for this, because like you guys said, it's across all the community, right?
Yeah, we are forming a work group. We are writing the charter right now. It's Kate's Infra, K8S dash Infra. We have a channel too, Slack channel. So Kate's Infra team. So please join us there. And we meet. We are trying to find a new time for meeting. We usually meet every other week on Fridays.
So before we have a common registry like GCR for everyone, can we allow each vendor to have their own GCR? Like for VMware, we have a GCR for cloud provider, but that's for, like Ben said, that's for post commit, means it's not pre-submit. We are thinking for cluster API provider, we are thinking use the similar pattern for the end-to-end testing. So what is the policy?
So this is I sent an email message to the working group the other day with regards to fine-grained access controls and sort of layered levels of repositories or registries, because GCR has issues with that, right? The idea of having sort of like a K8's IO registry or some registry where you could have layers, which in this case could be denoted by like slashes, right? And fine-grained access controls for those individual layers would be the ideal scenario where like you could just do KXIO/VMware, KXIO, KXIO cluster API/VMware, KXIO cluster API/ AWS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could have fine-grained access controls there, but you don't actually get that with GCR buckets.
Gotcha.
So I think feeding this into requirements with the working group is probably what we're going to have to do. It seems like this topic is a little meta, and we need to start to hash out requirements with the working group and try to move forwards. But I think the local hack, the local registry, that'll work for the time being.
That's like
I mean, so I'd also
documents.
I would also add, if we can actually get the local registry to work well, that sort of thing is kind of ideal, because a problem we have today is that these images just pile up and never really get cleaned up.
Yeah.
Hey, can I also request that we extend the requirements beyond just the testing infrastructure, but also where do we put the actual production containers?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start to punt off to that other meeting because it's kind of going beyond the scope of cluster lifecycle and definitely into the scope of the working group.
So if you come to Kate's Infra team and click on the pinned items, it'll take you to a doc. We've written a whole bunch of things down, but please add your comments and thoughts there.
Are there any other last topics here? Other than, yes, we need this?
I actually have a last minute question, but it's not related to this.
Fire away.
Has anyone done any work with OpenAPI specs for the Kubetum config?
That's a Fabrizio / Lucas question. I believe Lucas originally started down that road, but I think not recently.
Okay. I was looking at allowing people to patch them with something like Customize. And for that, we need a spec for it to work well. And it looks like that might be a little bit involved.
We can bring that up tomorrow, and I can make sure Fabrizio's there.
And is that work well or work at all?
I think it can do naive YAML patching, but you really want it to like properly merge things.
Right now, we have the machinery in place for upgrading pretty cleanly right now. So but if you want to use separate tooling to do it, other than we have command lines actually for doing the diff to the delta as well.
What I'm actually looking at is I need to provide part of the config that kind cares about that it needs to set for things to work, but I'd like to let other people specify like any other parts of the config they want. So like one route for that is just allowing you to supply a overlay to the config.
Okay, you just want a merge patch.
Yeah, I want to support something like merge patch that lets me provide the portion of the config that I absolutely have to provide to make things work, but allow someone else to specify the rest of it as they see fit.
Okay, I can think about it. I don't know if I'll have an answer by tomorrow, but we can loop in other folks.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Last topic, Justin. We got 7 minutes.
Hopefully we won't need it, but yes, so in our last meeting, we talked a little bit about this proposal for etcd ADM, which I am making, which is, to summarize, to combine Platform 9's etcd ADM CLI tooling with the work I was doing for the automated etcd manager. Tim, you asked me to do a KEP, so I've put together a KEP. The response seems pretty positive so far. The only question was around the scope in terms of like, is this going to be like a COPS for etcd type thing where you like do like etcd ADM up and it like gives you an etcd cluster? And the answer is a definitive no. So I like added up an additional commit this morning to like scope what cloud interaction we are doing and why, and what we're not doing, everything else. But I guess if Tim, I know you like gave it a sort of conditional or provisional approval. I don't know if we're ready to like send out an email to the mailing list and proceed with the sort of lazy consensus approach, or whether we want to do something more at this point.
I don't know if there's any other feedback that we're pending on. Maybe like timeout in a couple of days and then send the email.
Because yeah, I just I'm worried that I can always do a longer timeout, but I figure I might as well send it to SIG cluster lifecycle just so everyone can see it. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to be like, we do the KEP and then like, oh, someone didn't see it, and so we start, that sort of thing.
What do you think, Ravi?
I mentioned to Justin offline that I wouldn't have a chance to take a look at it till later this week. What were you suggesting for a timeout, Justin?
I'm happy to do whatever people are comfortable with. What works for people? A week from today, 2 weeks from today, Friday week, something like that. Any of those seem great to me.
Yeah, as long as it's at least a week from today, that should work for me.
I've already given my feedback, so I'm good from my side.
Actually, I want to reach out to you to find out some more information about that suggestion of yours, Tim, because I was like trying to ponder the idea. But yeah, that's the Bootstrap token encryption seems really cool, but I haven't fully grokked it yet. But
I think we can. That's an implementation detail. It doesn't need to be, right?
Right.
Eventually, when we actually have the tool, we can evaluate integration pieces there.
Why don't we just round it to the end of next week, and we'll have then be able to wrap up by the time we have this meeting again in 2 weeks, and we can sort of.
I think that's great.
The finished version of that meeting. And
then and we also have the weekend fuzziness. So like Friday of next week is sort of a couple of days plus or minus type thing. So that works.
Yes, exactly.
All right, I'll send out an email then, and thank you.
We are all out of topics. Are there any last topics that folks want to discuss? T-minus 4 minutes, or do we get 4 minutes back?
You said something about discussing this tomorrow. Which meeting is that?
KubeADM office hours.
Okay, I intend to attend that as long as I don't have any conflicts. Thank you.
Right. Round 2. Going once? Twice? 3 times? All right, thanks everybody.
Bye everyone.
Bye, thanks.